This is Ben Franklin, welcoming you to the Forecast, where we light a candle rather than curse the darkness. Each week, we highlight the people proving that progress isn't just possible, but necessary. As Poor Richard said, energy and persistence conquer all things. Now, let's get to work.
Welcome back to the Forecast. Today's guest is someone I've known since the electric and deeply formative days of the Bernie 2016 campaign, where she was not only a powerhouse surrogate, but a sharp, fearless voice for progressive values on national TV. If you turned on CNN, CBS, Fox, or maybe even TYT back then, chances are you saw Nomiki Konst holding her own, and more often than not, changing the frame. Nomi, welcome to the Forecast.
Thank you, and congrats on the Forecast. Love it. If your listeners have not read the first magazine, I am one page from finishing it. But so far, 98% in, I'm hooked. And I subscribe to a lot of magazines that I don't read. So the fact that I read this magazine fully means you've got something special. So congrats.
I appreciate that. That comes a lot. That means a lot coming from you, and especially anybody else out there who's listening to this and doesn't usually read the magazines. I do. That is the feedback I love to hear most. I don't usually read magazines, but I read yours. That makes me feel good. Thank you.
It also gives me a dopamine hit. Sorry, I know this is kind of like your goal with the Forecast, but I was on the subway and I was transported back to when I first moved to New York before everything was on our phones or we were as addicted. And it just felt really good. I felt like a human.
That memory is what I'm trying to go for. So that actually is deeply touching. So thank you. There is, having worked in digital politics for so long, I have come to the realization that I have contributed a lot to the poisoning of America and our addiction. And I profited from it, right? My hands are not clean, and so I can't change the past, but what I can do is try to help people remember, and we can build a better future, right? Today, though, I want to talk about truth and power, if that's okay. We can talk about the magazine, too, if you'd like. But...
Well, I was just going to say, you're like Craig Newmark. You just ruined journalism, and then you decided to just fund all the programs to reignite journalism.
I'm like Craig, but with less money. Yeah. I want to start with the DNC. We've talked a lot about the DNC over the years. You've seen a lot up close and very personal, many changes. Can you share with our listeners what's something the public still doesn't fully grasp about how the party structures maintain power?
Ooh, this is such a great question and very wonky. So I'm going to warn everybody.
Wonky, thank you.
Let's go for wonk. I'll try to make it as fun as possible. Okay, so Democratic Party should be democratic, right? It's a private corporation. It is not funded by the state like many other countries have funding that comes from the state. So it is a private corporation. So let's just start from the premise that they can do whatever the hell they want. But they do like to structure themselves, and they should structure themselves as a lowercase d Democratic Party.
Totally.
There are members from all over the country who run for their seats, and they are encompassed within a state party. There are 50 state parties plus territories and Democrats abroad. And so that is different. I know it gets confusing. It's different from the DNC convention where people run as delegates. Sometimes there's overlap, but there's a lot more delegates than there are members.
That's really the DNCC, right?
So people always are like, I was a delegate. And I'm like, no, delegates are different. But okay. So here we are. Now we have some problem states, some states that, each state has their own set of rules. So you've got the macro DNC at the national level. And then you have state parties, which have their own rules. And sometimes those rules overlap with state laws. So, the DNC has no control over, for instance, how a presidential primary or presidential caucus is structured. That is state law. So if your state is controlled by Republicans, your state primary structure is going to be influenced by Republicans, which is why it's really important for Democrats to operate in every single state. Okay, aside from the DNC, you have the DCCC at the national level and the DSCC. The DCCC is for the Congressional Campaign Committee. I know you know this very well. And the DSCC is for the Senate. I say this again because a lot of times people point at the DNC and blame, congressional losses on the DNC when the DNC has mostly nothing to do with that. That's usually the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Okay, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, the DNC is a living, breathing organization, or it should be, in which members meet regularly in their states, and then they meet, several times a year, especially if they're on a certain committee around the country. They'll pick different locations where they can all meet together. Those are the elected members. Now, the chair of the party, when it is not a sitting president, usually gets elected.
Yeah.
I will give credit to Joe Biden in which he could have just picked his chair, because that's traditionally been the case. But they had an election, and it was Jamie Harrison who won that election.
Mm-hmm.
You can have your critiques of Jamie Harrison, but he did win that election. And Joe Biden did say, I'm not going to appoint a chair like Joe Biden, or like Barack Obama did, or previous Democratic presidents had. The chair has committees in which he has in the past been able to appoint members to. Now, this is where it gets really wonky and gross, and where I get like my blood boils and I get angry. While there is all this democracy in the DNC, and there are all these members who raise their own money to become Democratic members, and they love their communities, and, they can be more conservative or more progressive, but, at least there's pure democracy there. There are committees like the Executive Committee and the Rules Committee in particular, who basically have full oversight over like anything voted on by the DNC membership. So say the DNC membership says that they want to have the thing that's relevant today is the DNC should be neutral. Say the members overwhelmingly vote in favor of DNC neutrality. There are a series of appointed members. So like not as many as there used to be, but there could be like at large because of gender dynamics, and former dignitaries like presidents and, secretaries of state or whatever. So those people do not run for their seats. They're appointed. And then there are people on the Rules Committee who have traditionally been mostly appointed. Sometimes they appoint members that have run the chair, or sometimes they just appoint random people like consultants. So my critique is that the Rules Committee can basically say, that's so great. I'm glad that you guys voted in favor of the DNC being neutral, but we're going to override that, which basically kills all democracy. If you know anything about fiscal control boards, like there's been fiscal control boards in cities like Detroit or in Puerto Rico or in Buffalo or, in New York years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That is where like some appointed board that has not been elected negates democracy. And so when I get critical of the DNC, it's really about these mechanisms in which they can prevent democracy from happening. Because I think fundamentally at the end of the day, the DNC members are there representing their communities, and they want to see a thriving DNC. And it's very much not about progressives versus conservatives. It's about, is my community being funded? Are we able to run elections in our locality? Are people in Iowa, is the Democratic Party in Iowa functional? Is the Democratic Party in Arizona or Texas functional? And I think we've made a lot of mistakes in the last 18 or so years, but especially under Obama, where he pulled the money away from the DNC. He focused into OFA, Organizing for America, which was an offshoot of his presidential race in 2008.
Yeah.
He put his people in charge of the DNC, and then stripped funding from the states. And as a result, we lost, when I was the first person to say this out loud, because I counted it, over 1,000 seats during the Obama years. We've come back quite a bit. And that's where I think Ken Martin, the reason why it's such a big deal that Ken Martin's in office, he's the chair, is because he has been consistently, as the former head of the State Party Chairs Association, he has been consistently advocating to put that money back into state parties. And he's already started that process, which makes him very dangerous, because, maybe I buried the lead here, but the appointed members on the Rules Committee usually have conflicts of interest. They're usually involved with a consulting class, and the consulting class has been running the Democratic Party as its slush fund, frankly, for the last, 15 to 20 years.
Well, I want to zoom in on that a little bit, because obviously as a former political consultant, maybe currently former, I'll say, there's a chance I'll jump back in at some point in the cycle, but right now I'm focused on media and training, so not as much political consultant right now. So there's all this stuff this week. The reason I ask is there's all this stuff this week because with David Hogg, and I think a lot of people don't really understand the full story. I don't understand the full story. What I've latched on to is that there are folks in the DNC unhappy with him saying people should be primaried. And I never quite understand how everybody in the Democratic Party hates primaries so much.
Yeah.
Because one, if we were like completely driven by consultants, we all make more money, right? With more primaries. And two, if we really believe in democracy, actually primaries are really healthy as part of that. And three, we keep trying to fix primaries and it does not work ever,
Right.
or almost ever. Maybe there's been a couple times, but so I want to take it on that too. Like, is David Hogg really like the savior for trying to keep primaries and get rid of like all the old Democrats who are out of touch, or what's really going on here?
He's not. This is a complete charade. However you say it.
Charade, yes. He is a
Um,
charade.
it's a charade, Keegan, okay? This is David Hogg, child. No, I'm kidding. No, I mean, listen, David, I think in the beginning I thought, okay, maybe he wasn't aware of what he was doing. And, and then maybe like after a few conversations, it would, and like respectful conversations, things would shift because, I felt he was acting in good faith in the beginning. I will very clearly say I don't think he's acting in good faith right now. And like put that down on paper if you want, and I'm happy to explain it.
Writing it down.
Start off with the fact that like I was on the Unity Reform Commission. I was appointed by Bernie Sanders to reform the Democratic Party along with 7 other Bernie people. And we went to war for 2 years with some of the darkest, most evil people I've ever met in my life. Weapons dealing consultants. I mean, just in person, like seemingly pleasant, but like knew how to work every single lever of the Democratic Party and work every little like op game you can imagine. It was like watching this. I mean, I'm not trying to be like compare it to this, but you see all these like CIA handbooks and like how to infiltrate a movement. And like, even though it was a committee and even though we were, going around the country and interviewing folks, I think fundamentally our opposition on the Unity Reform Commission had a lot of tricks up their sleeve. I think some of us fell for it, some of us didn't. But at the end of the day, like you had to kind of go with whatever, frankly, Bernie wanted to do. I think on that commission we paid way too much attention to superdelegates when we should have been focusing on the budget and ending conflicts of interest, because that would essentially end superdelegates' power.
Yeah.
Because most of those superdelegates had conflicts of interests. And they were there to preserve the power of the financial interests that it wasn't about progress. It was about, keeping the pockets lined of a handful of consultants. And, the budget is not transparent in the DNC. The budget has not been pre-approved by executive committee members. And so, billions of dollars being raised every single cycle would go out to these consultants who brought you the loss of Kamala Harris, who brought you, I think, by the way, that race was very winnable. Everyone wants to point at Joe Biden. They wanted to, whatever. I think it was winnable. I think there was a moment where the campaign went from momentum to like complete bland, strategically, going off in lots of directions that I think you and I could talk about forever that were not productive. But
yeah,
they hold the keys to the DNC. And so Ken Martin, I'll get to David Hogg in a second. Ken Martin taking over was an existential threat. I think they really thought they could get him out, but there had been too many years of losses, too many conversations with DNC members. And I think what came out of the Unity Reform Commission was an education for a lot of DNC members of what was really happening. And I think in good faith, I think a lot of folks, you could probably poll them, would agree that Tom Perez was not really elected the DNC chair. There were some shenanigans that came about on that second ballot, because there was a first ballot against Keith Ellison. It was very close and it went to a second ballot. And then mysteriously, a few people left the room, didn't vote. And mysteriously, Valerie Jarrett and Barack Obama started making phone calls to flip votes when no one was supposed to have access to the list of votes. So, Tom Perez was a big letdown for a lot of DNC members. And I think after that, even Jamie Harrison was a bit of a letdown and folks just had it. And Ken knows he's not bombastic. He walks softly and carries a big stick. He's not somebody who's going to ruffle feathers publicly, but he is definitely going in there and shifting things around. And so why does that lead to David Hogg? I think in the beginning, a lot of us just thought maybe David Hogg was being a little naive. Young, yes, we need to have primaries. Totally. Of course. I don't think Ken Martin is opposed to primaries. I think he wants it to be neutral. The DNC should be neutral because the DNC meddled in every single election in the last 20 years. And that's how we lose. He wants to have a body that is there to support democracy, not put their thumb on the scale of democracy. And
Yeah.
so David Hogg, while he is a newly elected vice chair, he's a representative of this institution in which we should be saying, like, yes, anybody should run, but we're not going to say you're better than that one. And let's not lie. Like I got yesterday, I think 6 emails from David Hogg, fundraising emails for his organization. He does not
Mhm.
talk about what kinds of candidates he wants to support. He makes it sound like this is some revolutionary concept of challenging Democrats. Like, I remember Justice Democrats, matriarchs.
I was going to say, it sort of reminds me of Brand New Congress. Remember that one?
Yes, brand new Congress.
Which they raised a lot of money. I'm not sure where it went to, but yeah. Well,
They merged with Justice Democrats
oh, did
eventually.
they?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and that's how that went down. But I think that, like, once it's one thing to say I want to be a vice chair, which is kind of ceremonial, to be completely honest. But he's using that, and it's right now becoming such a distraction. It's becoming such an internal dynamic. And about David Hogg, going on like Bill Maher's show to talk about DNC stuff, like, and frankly, not being honest. He's not being honest about what happened. So there was a complaint filed against him and Malcolm Kenyatta, a state rep from Pennsylvania. They're both vice chairs, about the gender dynamics there are these rules, like there's in the DNC, like you have to have so many, there has to be a balance of gender equity, which is good, right?
Yep.
And there was a complaint filed, and that happened like right after the election, about how that election went down. And there's a process, there's a procedure, which is great because these things didn't used to exist. And so Ken Martin, being the chair that he is going through that procedure in a really honest way.
Mhm.
And sure enough, there now has to be a vote because the gender rules were violated, in my opinion. And it doesn't mean that they don't have a chance at keeping those positions, but it just overlaps conveniently with this other thing that happened where he decided to launch his organization to challenge bad Democrats, in his opinion. But, again, who are those bad Democrats? Why are they bad? Who are the candidates you're running? He has not said any of these things. And simultaneously, he doesn't seem to be able to answer the question, which is, you're a vice chair of the DNC. Like, you're supposed to remain neutral. And like, I saw him at the White House Correspondents' Dinner weekend a few weeks ago, and a few people pulled me into a conversation with him and were like, you should really talk to Nomi. She's like, because at that point, everyone thought David was just acting in good faith and was trying to be a good progressive. And they're like, well, this is the person. Like, if you want to talk to anybody who gets it, talk to Nomi. And I was like, I'd be happy to talk to you privately. And like, the DNC is an onion. Like, just when you think you got it, like there's like 5 more layers. Like, it is just this dark entity and like it's a metaphor for like the abyss. It's just, you never know how bad it's going to get. And
Yeah.
he was just so resistant to even the lightest conversation. And then he said to me, I have millions of young people at my back. And I said, well, David, I was on Bernie's 2016 campaign. That was actually millions of young people. And I'm sorry, but I don't know any young people who are subscribing to your email list and watching Bill Maher.
How do you
Which is
reply?
true. I do know more about his, March for Our Lives crew, the followers
Yeah,
are
no, for sure.
upper middle class ladies, like older ladies. So
He's trying to be a martyr, it seems like, right?
yeah,
In the
it's
situation.
so after feeling the resistance, and he's extremely resistant, I said, go vet me, go Google me, do whatever you need to do, talk to more people, 3 people here that you trust. But he was also being shown around by a consultant, who I knew, and you probably know too, at the Correspondents' Dinner. And I saw, like, for those of us who've been on the inside, I saw the infrastructure around him, and I'm just of the opinion now that he's being used as a weapon to create distraction, create chaos, and sabotage Ken Martin's reform goals. I think he's going to Ken's going to do what he wants. And at the end of the day, Ken's going to win because the DNC members see through it because they're just frustrated. Like, this is just another trick in the hat of what folks do in the DNC. When I say it's this layered onion, like when I was on that commission, I mean, the tricks that they were using to sabotage our work, it was like weaponizing. I mean, there was a point where there was a rumor being spread that made it all the way to MSNBC, where Jane Clubb, who's now the chair of the ASDC, which is the Association of State Party Chairs, which is what Ken had, and Jim Zogby, who had once been on the executive committee, and he had been in the DNC for years and years, a big reformer, and I and myself, and we were, three of the members. There was this rumor that spread that we wanted to eliminate primaries and replace them with caucuses because we had a white person's agenda, that we wanted to weaken the votes of people of color. Now, number one, let's just start off with the fact that I wasn't even on that committee, and neither was Jim Zogby. We were on the budget committee, or the party reform committee, which is about the budget, and so that's why they were coming after us, because we were like going for the budget. And also, it's state law. Like, we wouldn't have the ability if we wanted to. We weren't advocating for that. We weren't like nothing about that. It was just BS. But they were trying to, like, we were getting a lot of headway with the budget conversation, and they were just trying to, smear us. And, other things that they would do is we go behind, actually the day of our vote, there was this, for those of you who are listening that are old enough to remember this, I was caught on camera dropping an F-bomb on C-SPAN. And that was the day of our vote. And it was
that
like
was
the
a
first
scandal back then.
it was, oh my God. And so just some backstory on that. There were never any cameras like following this ever. And so I didn't even know C-SPAN was there. We were in a basement at a hotel, and like, this is another trick they would do. They would like cut our Wi-Fi. They wouldn't buy the Wi-Fi. So we had it was like we couldn't text each other. It was just all sorts of dirty, dark tricks. And we complained about it. And so this is the last meeting, and we had this meeting behind closed doors, which, by the way, also against the rules of the DNC. Any reporter can walk into any meeting, because they're all supposed to be open. So we had this meeting with during lunch with all of our colleagues to try to negotiate the final terms of the report that we were voting on. And there were a few things that we had agreed on. And when we went out, not only were they not on the report that we were voting on that was being projected on the wall, but people were turning the votes. And so before I had my little F-bomb moment, there were two other people who had also gotten angry. And so it was like the tension was building up. And then when I spoke, because one of the things was something I wrote, I lost my shit and dropped an F-bomb, and I was like so embarrassed. And then I remember going to Larry Cohen, who was the vice chair of the commission, and being like, I'm so sorry, I dropped an F-bomb. He's like, it's okay. Like, sometimes these things happen. And then we walk up after like hours, and I have like thousands of, it was like somebody had captured it and it went totally viral, and like Michael Moore pushed it out there. And it was this like moment where, I like lambasted the DNC for, basically flipping the vote. Like they lied. And so these are the kinds of tactics that they use, and they think they can get away with it, and they do. And I think in this situation, David Hogg this is not David Hogg alone. This is like, this is a masterclass in trying to make a young person a weapon against a very unpopular DNC, which is something he keeps saying, like, approval ratings are lowest they've ever been. It's like, no, actually they were low 8 years ago. They're a little bit higher, believe it or not. I can't believe I'm saying that. They're still low. But like, that ain't because of Ken Martin. That is because of all the people beforehand and the consultants who are frankly loving what you're doing and attacking Ken Martin, the DNC.
Well, and like, so I would argue that the big D Democratic corruption that everything you're describing from 2016 to like now, objectively is part of a corruption issue that we've had in the big D Democratic Party for quite some time, sadly. And we also have the corruption on the progressive side.
Yep.
As well, frankly, like not to shock any of our listeners, but there's a ton of folks on the left who are just in this to make money and deal, and it's like it's not just the centrists that are corrupt, from my experience. No, but you made a key point there. Sometimes maybe there some of these folks are in there to gum up the works to begin with. But like I feel like it makes it harder for us to get people to care about the Republican and Trump corruption that is blatantly happening, like way out in the open, so much so that they're like, it's not corrupt if we just tell everybody what we're doing out in the open. They're just sort of brazen now at this point.
Yeah.
So I use this like AI bot I built that helps like research for like, questions. It was really interesting for you because I've known you for so long. And one of the things it pulled, and I'm curious if this is accurate, it said, one of the questions suggested for you was, you've talked before about how political corruption isn't just cash in envelope, it's access, it's media, it's culture. Did you actually say that, or did it hallucinate on that? Because I was like, I don't remember her saying that somewhere. But it sounds like it pulled it from somewhere. But let's just assume that you said that, because I think it's a profound quote, right? Like there's a culture of corruption everywhere. And
Totally.
like how do we handle that? How do we unmask corruption and make people care again about it?
I mean, I don't know if I said it exactly that way, but I think it summarized probably like my whole career.
Yeah, that might be it. It's just like, this is how.
Honestly, like I sometimes
Nomi's like theme in life, right?
I forget, I have a lot of stuff on camera. And so sometimes I just found this old hard drive from, 10 years ago or so. And I like watch stuff and I'm like, I said that? What? Wow. Like, or like I said something that I would totally say today verbatim. And I was thinking it back when I was like 25 years old. So, it's always amazing when you go back and like read stuff that you wrote a long time ago or watch things. Yeah, I think part of what you're doing is we as individuals, it's like we have to start acting locally a little bit more in this digital world, because so much of what excuse me, is being controlled, more than anybody, is by so much of our culture, so much of our critical thinking, and so much of our behaviors and how we react to situations like the David Hogg situation, for instance, is part of this design by like the tech oligarchs who've been working on this for years and years, a social experiment. And, I think part of the reason why David Hogg his story is getting out there in a certain way and people are reacting is because the internet doesn't like create a space for nuance. And it's not sexy to talk about, how the DNC rules work. And I did that for years, but I was also on the side of being critical of the DNC. So I was really popular when I said these things. But now like the progressives are in charge of the DNC and for like a month. And it's like, David Hogg is like wrecking Ken Martin, or this woman, Lindy Lee. I listened to her interview the other day and she was blaming Ken Martin. She's like, I met with Ken Martin and I was telling him Joe Biden was too old and he didn't listen to me. I was like, lady, Ken Martin wasn't even in charge of the DNC when Joe Biden was running. But it's an example of how people are using the outrage of the internet and the outrage against institutions, which is not anything new. This has been going on for at least 12 or 13 years, this collective outrage against institutions. It started way before, but it really started to build up.
It's exhausting, at least for me.
Exhausting. Yeah. And, to hear, I think, a new generation think that they invented this. I'm not trying to sound like an old lady, but like we have been in this mess for a while. But now it's like it's this next level where there isn't a depth to it that I think, when we are on Bernie or during Occupy there was. Now it's like, it is very much a weapon of, it's like a weapon of mass social design. Like there's this, to see how someone can tweet something out or somebody can kind of shift public opinion if they have a little bit of influence. And then suddenly thousands of people and bots, let's be honest, which also push things in a direction to make it popular, can impact how someone thinks. Like in the old days, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, like say prior to 2020, before some of these algorithms changed even a more aggressive way, I would be able to counter a David Hogg and also get some sort of interaction. Like I can't get that now. It's not, and I have a lot of validity in this conversation, but it's very difficult. So it's, I think that like we as a society right now have a big challenge in the counter narrative because there's just so many forces to drown it out. And the algorithm is like, it's a momentum machine. So if the momentum is going in one direction, you know how momentum works. Like it's very hard to pull that momentum away.
Yes.
And so there's an inertia on the other side. And so how do you, and like, if you're a woman or a person of color or woman of color, or, you're queer, it's really, 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 really hard to be that counter narrative. And like, I think the other aspect of David Hogg, why it's so effective, if he's a white guy. I'm not like trying to use identity, but identity is a big part of how this algorithm works. There's like young white males do really well in the algorithm. And so I
Especially when
think,
they're victims.
especially when they're victims, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and it's, the fact that he's conflating two different things that are happening when, like, it is about the gender dynamics and a procedural thing that is really common and really, well, I shouldn't say common, but like it's very much like nobody's questioning it internally, and then conflating it with like Democrats need to be primaried. And I don't know if you saw these videos go out about like Debbie Dingle, who fell asleep in a hearing the other day. That hearing went until like 3 a.m. or something, like 2 or 3 a.m. Like, does Debbie Dingle need to be primaried because she fell asleep? By the way, others fell asleep in that hearing too that were younger. It was a long hearing about Medicaid cuts, and Democrats were frustrated that they had to deal with this bullshit that Republicans are forcing down their throats right now. And it's going to lose them an election, by the way. Like, these are not popular things. And David Jingle is like a good one, right? So I get, we have a, I understand this is not new either. Like, the average age, by the way, has gone down. But the average age of a Congress member is old. Yeah. Welcome to the last 50 years, in our party and in Washington. Not a new concept. I am also, and I remember when I was 28 saying the same thing, because
Yeah.
I did do this in 28, and you can go find that writing. I did a lot of it. Like, we needed to have a next generation, but that was because I'm a millennial, and the baby boomers, by the way, still haven't let go. But it doesn't mean that just because you're younger, you're better. Look at Pete Buttigieg. Look at everybody in the Trump administration. I would take a Bernie Sanders over most of the young Democrats that I see rising into office right now. I'm being very honest about this, because I think that there is a depth that people are missing.
Even
It's
even
about,
AOC, Bernie,
yeah,
Bernie over AOC, pick Bernie.
yes, he has institutional knowledge. I'm not saying that AOC wouldn't be a good leader, but there's a she's my Congress member, and she's never had a primary, like a real primary. So like, I like the
Yeah.
fact that people are tested. It shows you who they are. I've known her since literally the beginning, since she just was thinking about
Mhm.
running for office. So this is not any sort of attack on her. It's just leadership is something that, it's a muscle that is nurtured, and it doesn't mean that we have a lot of bad older lawmakers, and we have to clear way for another generation and nurture them. And then I think that's kind of how we got in a situation where Gen X is kind of well, I don't know if Kamala Harris is Gen X, but that, like, that generation has not been able. And Kamala Harris to me is like, this is a woman, if she's left her own devices, she's gonna mess up. And I don't even necessarily blame her. I blame the generation before not letting her lead. Because if you're not able to lead, you're not nurturing your muscles
Yeah.
and becoming a better leader.
No,
But with
there are a
that,
lot of things I can be critical for Kamala of being a past client and having worked with them very closely, her and her team, and knowing a lot from the inside. This election, yeah, she got handed a raw deal, I feel.
yeah,
And so, I get really mad when people are trying to blame her. But I do want to zoom out a little bit because there's a thread I just want to pick up on here. And I'll one last comment on David Hogg, which if him or one of his consultants that's out there showing him off like wants to come in and defend his honor, definitely open invitation to do so. If this podcast makes its way to someone listening who cares about that, but like I see him as a broader problem, regardless of your political views, that is cultural, which I would sum as GTM, get the money, right? Like, I just
yep,
think that more and more people are like, what is the point? The world is probably going to end at some point. I just
hmm,
need to get as much cash as possible and figure out my way to get that money and say what I need to do, play the role, whether it's playing a bad guy, a good guy, a little bit of both, the mysterious guy, obviously not always guys. I'm being very gendered here. I mean, people, not
yes,
just men. Or so, like, I see a cultural problem of people just not caring. And I feel like Bernie, like what you and I were a part of so many years ago now, 10 years ago, it was so special, was tapped into people frustrated at banks
right,
creating a raw deal for people and getting away with it. and the Clintons profiting off of that and going and getting paid to speak to them and not releasing the transcripts, like, right? Like, there was this real public outrage that I'm not sure would exist today because people are so focused on getting theirs. And maybe this is more of an existential question, but I'm curious, like, how, where do we go from here? Or should we just all like try to make our money before the world burns?
Me, I'm like the last person in the world who'd ever. God, I wish I had that gene. That capitalism gene.
I know, right? I mean, I'm big into like post scarcity economics, and that is a little bit of a pipe dream for me, but it's what keeps me going. So my hope is that we can get past that. It just might not happen in my lifetime
I
rather.
think I was raised by like immigrant culture where we still recycle our tinfoil, and I've like been fighting that kind of, you know, culture for my entire life, and it's still, I still like, it's a, I don't know, I've tried to be that person. I wish that I'd had that kind of upbringing, but my brain doesn't work that way. How many times I've started like nonprofit-y things versus things that could have been totally been for profit, and my brain didn't think that way, and now I'm like, oh, that could have been a for-profit thing, not a nonprofit. Why did I make it a nonprofit?
Yeah.
Anyways, I do think you're tapping into something that is important, and there's the vibes of the Bernie movement that I think Gen Z, it turned into the outrage on the internet, and the vibes are being taken by Gen Z, absorbed by Gen Z, but not the values. And, you know, the values came out of like, I am an elder millennial, you know,
I love
elder
it.
millennial. Yes, I'm 41. But, you know, we came out, okay, so I was going into my my senior year of high school when 9/11 happened. Everything about like my future life was framed in a post 9/11 world. I
Yeah.
didn't end up going to the colleges I wanted to go to because it was New York and DC, and my mom was panicking. I mean, it was just so many different aspects here. Like, and then, you know, we go into the Iraq War, and of course that affects our generation. And then the economy collapses, and that affects, and that's just as we get out of college, or at least the elder millennials. So everything in my world, and specifically those who've been around my generation, this age, has been framed through the lens of chaos and crisis and institutions failing, and the economy collapsing, and like trying to be resourceful. And then this is all happening as the digital age is coming about, and so we're like the most raw digital natives, but also know the world before. So I think, you know, and then Occupy, of course. So it was natural for the Bernie movement to be very much focused on values. But there's this like inverse thing that's happening right now where it's like, cancel all the elders, and we don't actually have values, and we just have the outrage. And you know, outrage can be very helpful if it's rooted in something, but if it's just flailing or if it's directing, it's just a weapon.
Yeah.
And I really worry about, I mean, going back to the Hogg situation, because it's just such a great example. He doesn't talk about, and when he's asked, he doesn't answer it, by the way, how he's picking the candidates that he's challenging, why he thinks it's okay to not be neutral in the DNC when he's asked about that, which is something that we fought very hard for
Mhm.
you know, many years, to have a neutral DNC. And, you know, what he plans on doing the DNC. If you don't like the DNC so much, then why are you vice chair? Like, go on the outside. I mean, I'm not in the DNC, and yeah, exactly. That was a reference to
But
money.
yeah, for those who can see, I was making a money, grabbing the money.
Yeah, I mean, and so back to what you're saying about like the world's collapsing and let's just find the money. I think there's some people who, especially in the influencer economy, the world that we're living in, it's like very easy and sexy and attainable to do that. And for others who just like, I think, beat up older millennials, I don't see a lot of people around me kind of gravitating to that space. Doesn't mean that they don't exist, but it's just think that we've been like, you know, burdened by so much that we never will see the light because we just don't know of a world. I'm also of the place like, I don't have this let's move to Canada mindset because I'm like, oh, we've been through this like 50 times already. Like, I'm a pro at this. Do you guys want to know? Not to mention the
Very true.
pandemic. Like,
Oh, you think this is bad? I'll tell you.
I know. I mean, that's for people who, you know, graduated high school in 2002 and college around 2006, 7, 8, around that time. I think we're all very like, we have our tricks. And then, you know, and by the way, and the US was in a better situation than many countries around the world. Like, I'm Greek, you know that. We've been in Greece together for
Yeah.
a political conference. I mean, if you want to talk about an economy crashing, family members of mine, I mean, they were on the barter system
Yeah.
10 years ago. There
Yeah.
were people just like, they couldn't get cash from their ATMs, and pensions, and people were killing them. I mean, the suicide rate went up. You know, it was horrible.
Yeah.
It was, and it totally collapsed an economy of people who are very educated. I mean, that generation in Greece was the highest educated in all of Europe. People don't realize that. And they're still getting some of the lowest wages, if not the lowest wages in the EU right now, still to this day. And the cost of living has gone up because a bunch of foreigners, Northern Europeans and Americans, have moved there and bought up distressed properties. And so now Greeks can't afford to live in their own.
And not to mention Airbnb, right? I saw a lot
Yeah,
of Airbnb graffiti there.
exactly. So much Airbnb. And this is happening all over the world. It's, you know, it's happening in
Yeah.
Italy, it's happening
Yeah.
in Portugal and Spain and Argentina and Mexico. I mean, you name it. But that was rough. Like, we don't have social security nets in our safety nets in our country for the most part. We have some, but you know, even with social safety nets in Europe, it was still coming down to bartering because the debt crisis was so bad. So
That
you know,
may happen here, by the way. We'll get into predictions in a little bit, but I'm not unconvinced that we won't have a Greek level financial crisis. We'll see. I mean, it just depends. You know, Trump keeps going back and forth on whether he actually wants to completely tank the economy or just make us suffer a little bit.
he's just like going back and forth. Like, every day is just a
Yeah, it just depends on
ride
who's
on
paying him
the
that day, who got him a jet. You know,
I just want like one billionaire to come forward and be like, I will buy you a jet, an American billionaire. I just want them to say, like, take this one, or Boeing just to offer him one of those like 767. Was 767? Is that the one that kept falling from the air and like the wings would blow out or something? The irony of this is also it's a Boeing jet.
Yes, very
Like,
ironic.
he's taking a real risk there.
And I agree 1,000,000%. Like, if I could go infinity percent with you on, we just need to start offering gifts to Trump because he really is that simple.
Yeah.
Like, he just is a man that wants to be like have his. I mean, they're putting fucking banners up in DC. Like, he's like he's our dear leader for his parade. Like, it's.
Oh, they're getting ready for the military parade. When is it?
It's June 14th, but they're like starting to get ready in DC, and I saw them they're starting to put banners up of like a portrait of him, like along the parade route. It's like we're going to be in North Korea soon. It's nuts. But that is he just has to everything. Yeah, this could go the entire podcast episode. I don't want to talk about Trump that much right now.
I know you want me to do a prediction later, but I'm going to do an early prediction. And
okay.
I don't know if this is against the law, so I have to frame this very carefully. But imagine he is on that Boeing flight and like one of the Boeing things happens. The arc, the irony, the narrative.
The window like pops out.
The perfect way for the story to end is like something catches on fire. Just like, it wasn't because like Qatar planted something. It was just good old fashioned shitty capitalism.
Yeah, no, that is a good one. We'll see what happens. I don't think that's illegal, but just in case anybody is like listening to this, we're talking hypothetically as a joke. Yeah, this is just a parody. I am curious though. Just one last 2016 question for you.
Sure.
Because we talk a lot about 2016. It was a pretty big moment in both our lives. It changed us in many positive and negative ways. If you could talk to yourself, your 2016 Nomi, if you go back, time travel, knowing everything you've learned, what would you say? I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
This is a big one. Advice.
Yeah.
Journal.
Any advice, stock tips, insider trade. I mean, we're talking about money here, so maybe it's just
like. About money. Oh, this is a money thing?
No, it doesn't have to be money. I was saying, but you could go and be like, hey, buy the Melania coin at the right time, you'll make millions. Oh. But like, I'm just saying, whatever, anything, right? Advice, any sort of comment about the future. You go back and you visit 2016 Nomi, what would you say?
I think for myself, two things I would have journaled. I'm really angry at myself for not taking the time to journal.
Yeah.
I would have written more. I did write a lot of articles, but I didn't write as much as I should have. I had a lot of ideas that people stole later because I would talk about them and then they'd go write them and take credit for them. So own your worth, lady. And then along with owning my worth, also negotiate those contracts a little bit better. I look back and I'm like, okay, what could have happened? Very selfish because this is a money theme. I don't know. For other people, what would I say? Teen know me. What would I say? I don't know. It's such a blur. I don't know. What would you say, Keegan? Give me a prompt.
If I would go back, I would probably tell myself to take better care, because I worked my ass off like 7 days a week, and I like look back now, at that time I thought that it was going to turn into like, speaking of riches, like my own millions, and like making sure I could pay for college and pay for my retirement off of like that work. And I developed some pretty bad habits that I feel like broke me for a bit. I'm doing better now, thankfully, but I was I was like taking Adderall to work until 2 a.m, and then getting really high so I could pass out. And like, I just don't think that was very healthy.
So
and I would go back.
Adderall, and then what would you do afterwards? I'm so curious.
I would usually use cannabis to get down. Sometimes it would be like, Xanax or something like that. But like, yeah, I was always I was in this like lots of uppers, work. Okay, I need to shut down. Like, I need something to shut my brain down. It was usually cannabis and sometimes drinking, but it's just like, I wish I could go back and tell myself, like, it's not worth any of that. It's not worth it. I can't tell you what's going to happen because I'll break the universe or something if I reveal too much. But like, use drugs for enjoyment, not for like working nonstop.
Yeah. I did not. I was actually pretty clean. I was doing a lot of yoga. I look back at those photos. I'm like, how did I have time to do yoga in between all these things?
No, that's really smart.
On TV, I was like very much conscious of how it was like my one saving grace was yoga. So luckily during that period, I was very healthy. Afterwards, I would say if you want to go to like 2019 and beyond, I think that's when I started to get a little unhealthy in my habits. But then, I don't know. It was the TYT days when I flipped to TYT and I was on the road constantly, and I was in the Reform Commission because it was happening simultaneously. I think that's when I started to wear down my body. And like, I look at photos, I'm like, oh, I do not look good. I look younger now than I did during that period. But 2016, I don't know. There was so much optimism. And I think another thing I would say is just be careful of who you trust, because there were so many people in the movement that either at the time were not really there with right intentions, or could potentially have been working for the right or some foreign interest or something. I think that we wouldn't, both of us probably agree. But then also just people who were there for the money, were there for the fame, and would take credit for things. I mean, I think that was the thing that was amazing to me. It's like just how easily people who had nothing to do with something would go out there and take credit for things. And then in 2020, just like this new crop of people showed up and just like took over the Bernie campaign with no institutional knowledge, no values. And like, then they wrote books. And I mean, I know you and I both know, but like it was a rewriting of the history of what happened. And I think that, people like ourselves probably should be a little bit more conscious of which, I mean, that's why I had journaled, because there were so many stories that we could have told.
Our mutual friend, my former partner, Run, like says this a lot. Like, the timestamp is a critical aspect of content that people don't realize. You gotta and this is part of why I'm trying to do this. I want to create like these stories and put them out there and have it timestamped, because I didn't for so long, and like, I agree with you. It's like, there's all these things I wish I had written down. I wish I had published. So
I remember there was somebody who wrote a book on like reforming the DNC and interviewed me about it. And then, first it interviewed me about it, like just in general, not like I'm writing a book about, and then they took everything I said and turned it into a book. They were nowhere near it. But there was also I'm amazed at the grift that people have, but like none of us had time to do it because we're doing it. And then suddenly there's this book that pops up about, all the reforms Democrats should do. And then they go on a book tour. It was like, what are you talking about? Yeah. We'll talk about who that was afterwards.
So we're gonna do a follow-up episode where Naomi and I name names, because there's a lot out there, and there's definitely where a lot of people, it's like, the problem is, I hope our listeners understand, some of this is, a lot of it's hearsay, and like, there are people who said stuff to me, and I think we're actually trying to purposely mess up Bernie's campaign, but it's like, it's hard. You can't really prove that. Like, you just have your suspicions, right? Like,
like, I'm sorry, but one person went to go work for RT. Tulsi Gabbard. Like, there's some people that are very obvious that they were
Well, yeah, but I also still worked with Tulsi up until her presidential campaign launch, which was a mess and is a story for another time. And I still like will never forget asking Tulsi. So I'm curious, are you an agent of Russia?
You actually asked her?
Yes. She
What was
laughed
she?
at me and said no. For the record, we were having pizza at her house and talk, like we were right before she launched her presidential campaign, and I was just like, I had a couple drinks in me, and I was like, I want to ask, I want to see what happens, because
Yeah.
I still think, I don't know, it's so hard to know. I just think that Tulsi and a bunch of others that have been sort of red pilled, I would call it. It comes down to ego, and like Tulsi really hated being criticized in the media. She hated Nira. She hated all the centrists, sometimes for good reason. And she really hated the media. And like Tucker was always so like welcoming to her. Like
Yeah.
she would always comment on how great it was to go on Tucker's show because he was like really nice. And I think that obviously there's like the whole like cult thing that she was part of too that like probably impacted this. But
She's a weak person. 'Cause Tucker is nice to me too, but know your enemy. Weak. Should
yeah,
be
I met
no.
Tucker once too, and he was very nice. And I was like, this was like the Crossfire days. And I was like, oh, Tucker Carlson's nice. But it didn't make me into a Republican.
Right. That's insane. Like weak people. But she had, her background, for those who haven't dug in, I think it started way earlier. And her Modi ties and her family's, I don't think she was ever a progressive.
Oh, we should do it like one episode where it'll be like Charlie and Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and we'll have a big. This is when I start doing video again. We'll have like a big chart and all the strings tied together of like who's connected to who. Because Nomi and I like to talk about this a lot because there's the people. There's a lot of compromised individuals in the Democratic and media world.
Yeah. We haven't even gotten to Gray Zone. That's a fun one.
I'm curious though, what like you made a really good prediction already. I'm curious, a funny one.
Boing gate.
Some that won't get the Secret Service investigating us. Like, do you have some forecasts that you can share with our listeners for this year and beyond?
More specific. Give me a genre.
All right, that's very vague. So I mean, we could talk. I'll give you an option, right? So I'm curious. A lot of my guests have been talking about 28 candidates. So if you want to make a prediction on like who's going to come out of the gate stronger, or likely nominee, someone you like, totally open to that. But if you'd rather stay out of the 2028 race for now, I would say, what do you think the state of the economy will be next year at this point?
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know about that. I'm not an economist, so I'm like the wrong person to ask about that.
Okay. How about the state of the Democratic Party? Are things going to get better? Why don't we go there?
I think when it comes to actually, since that's the topic of this, most of this conversation is about the DNC. I think Ken is aggressively, Ken is not going to be ousted. I think that this David Hogg thing is going to be like, he's going to be voted out because the DNC members are not having this. Like, there's the external conversation and then there's the internal conversation. And the DNC is an internal operating, party. And I think Ken has a lot of support. And this is just emboldening the members, at least that I've spoken to. And I'm watching them also like on social media, try to explain things to folks. And this is all very procedural, but like for the most part, I think this is just angering more members. So I think, Ken is going to continue to do what he's doing quietly, and hopefully he'll be able to build a stronger messaging apparatus. I get it. Like, he had to basically flip this party overnight, and it's not an easy thing to do. And there were definitely going to be forces that are going to try to sabotage his work because there's a lot of money in it. So I think that state parties being funded more, which they've already put in $1 million, which is great. I think that we're going to see some turn. Some of this is just momentum. It's not even about money. It's just some of the legislatures, I think, will turn back, hopefully, in the next couple of years. I think some of these legislatures are a lot closer than people are aware, and in states that are consistently red, like Arizona, for instance. I use this as an example because in 2006, we turned it blue when I worked there. So it's always been a state that has there's more of an opportunity than people think. And the legislature is more MAGA oriented, but that group of MAGA voters, it's not the way that the makeup is right now. Is there's actually the centrist Republicans are the ones that could be easily voted out and the Democrats could take over. And then you just have the MAGA voters and the Democrats in the legislature. for the most part. So you have a lot of opportunities to fight back at the local level. And I think, cities are doing that as they did in 2017 against Trump. I didn't, obviously Congress, if the economy turns around, I think it's going to be because Trump doesn't have a choice. We didn't talk about his foreign policy trip right now, but he's switching his gears every day. I'm totally confused as to how he abandoned Netanyahu overnight and
Mm.
started to side with, the Mideast. But I'm sure there's some economic
Probably
aspect.
involves some gifts.
And the fact that, he got the last hostage home. And, today he once again said that he wants to develop Gaza and turn into, what did he call it? I forgot. He had some term for it that was, liberty and brandy and all that kind of.
Yeah. Something awful.
Yeah, something awful. But, I think if the way that I always look at it is even Democrats on their worst day are generally in a better position than Republicans on their best day. And so much of our electoral outcomes has been the effect of kind of momentum, which is why it's really important for Democrats to just up their game, maybe 15%, because I think that's all you really need to defeat Republicans. We've
Mhm.
talked about this, so much. They have to pull every single lever. They have to put in hundreds of millions of dollars into judicial races. They have to have tech oligarchs switch the algorithms to go in their favor. They have to, have restrictive voting laws. They have to,
Yeah.
take over the courts and legislatures. And still, even with all of that, and not to mention the presidential race, Kamala Harris barely lost these swing states when you look at the numbers. So I do think that we have an opportunity, especially if we get our house in order. And even if we don't get to 100%, if we get to 30%, I think we have a great opportunity of taking back power. Now, if we can get up to 50%, 75%, and rebuild these institutions and make them more democratic, then I think we have a really great hope. We have a lot of hope for the future. We just have to do it. And that means not being distracted by David Hogg BS, frankly, because none of that is making a difference in everyday people's lives. They don't care about the institutional, fights that are happening within the DNC. They don't even know how, like you've had me on to explain how the DNC works. And I'm bored listening to it because yes, it does impact people's lives, but nobody wants to hear about that. They want to hear about your goals. And if David Hogg is just railing against the DNC that he was elected to a month ago and Ken Martin was elected to a month ago, why aren't you talking about, what these candidates that you want to run are representing? He's just talking about the DNC brand. And I think, we have to keep our eye on the prize here. It's about working people. It's about what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
How we were all motivated to join the Bernie campaign and why so many people would cry when he would give these 90-minute to 2.5 hours long speeches over and over and over again. People wanted their lives to improve. And so just keep the eye on the ball and rebuild our institutions a little bit. And that's my hope right now.
Well, that is a great note to end on. I agree. I hope that we can get focused on that original purpose.
Yeah. I don't think it's rocket science. Everyone's like, what's the brand of the DNC? And we need to get our message right. Oh, we get the message. We've always had the message. Just we need to disseminate it. And that's where the institutional stuff happens. Investing in every single community in this country so that we have messengers out there, local messengers talking about what Democrats represent, which is hopefully focused on working people. But, and read the forecast.
Let me thank you. I appreciate you joining.
You're awesome. Thank you. Congrats.